This is part 2 of the vintage RC10 long front shock conversion project that I'm working on. Of course, this is more than just a long front shock conversion. As I mentioned in my previous video, I wanted to do kind of an overhaul here. So what I'm actually going to do is start with the rear and give a little status update here. So as you can see, both front and rear, I have the Dynatech white suspension arms installed. When you get them, they are not a perfect fit, or they're not exactly a plug and play. You do have to do a little bit of dremeling to get them to fit on both the front and the rear. The first thing you need to do is drill out the hinge pin holes with either a 3/16 inch drill bit or with a smaller drill bit, and just slowly bore it out to get the hinge pins to fit. Because otherwise the hinge pins won't go through, or it'll be really, really tight. A few other things with the rear that you have to do. The opening, let me flip this over here, change the lighting. So the opening on the inside of the suspension arm is a little bit smaller than the length of the arm mount. So you have to, I just use a sanding bit and just grind out either one side or both sides of the arm to make a little bit more space here. And I'm pretty sure what I ended up doing is grinding out just part of the front here, okay, to make space. Now when you do that, if I just grind out the front, that's going to move the suspension arm back a little bit compared to the stock position. Now it just so turns out that with the hub carrier, at least with this Megatech hub carrier, it's also the opening on the inside of the arm is not quite large enough to fit the hub carrier, so you have to grind out from the inside as well over here. So I grinded out the front on the inside of the arm, and then the rear on the outside of the arm, and they pretty much cancel out so that the hub carrier is in the stock position here. Okay, I installed some of the neon yellow RPM parts, the shock collars and spring cups and everything. I did not put in the Delrin pivot balls. I basically decided to leave those out because whenever you have a joint, you want to have it being plastic to metal usually. That gives you the freest movement, the smoothest movement. So you have a plastic ball cup here and then a metal ball. And so this should actually give you freer movement, I think, than putting the Delrin pivot ball in there. For the front, the pivot ball doesn't even fit inside this opening here, so I couldn't use it at all. The Megatech hub carrier is actually quite nice. I'm not exactly sure if it's a 0 degree hub carrier or a 1.5 or 3 degree. I'm guessing it's 0. So if you want to use this on your RC10, I mean, it works just fine. It looks nice. The blue goes nicely with the rest of the blue here, so I think that's pretty cool. And I used an associated B4 CVA assembly. So this CVA here is brand new. I just put it together and installed it. The hub carrier uses two 3/16 inch bearings, and you just set it up as you normally would on a B4. So you have two. Actually, I used 3 washers here between the wheel spacer and the hub carrier, and then you put the wheel spacer on, and then you put the drive pin on, and then you're all set. Normally you would use two spacers here on a B4, but I guess it just so turns out there's just enough plane here that I needed to use another washer in there. Okay. Now towards the front, this is where it gets a little bit fun. The Megatech steering rack that I got, it actually turns out that it's about the same length as the RC10 steering rack. So I had to go and find an RC10T steering rack. I did have one. Can't really this one right here. Okay. And I was going to use this originally, but the problem here that I eventually learned is that the RC10T rack, the screw that you use to go through, to act as a post that this pivots on, is actually a different screw than the standard 3/8 or was it 332 threaded screws that you normally use on the RC10. And I didn't have those screws and I couldn't find them. So I eventually found a Composite Craft steering rack that I installed on this. It's actually, it looks almost exactly the same as the original RC10 rack I had. It's just longer. So I can retain the correct steering geometry here. So that's all installed. Let's see, what else did I do here? The bulkhead and shock tower and shocks are all installed and set up. The neon yellow bumper is installed, so that's pretty cool. I did have to use on this front nose plate, it comes with two options for either a long wheelbase or a short wheelbase. Let me see if I can see this hole here. There's another set of corresponding holes for these two that are up a little bit. If you install the screws on those holes, that gives you the standard wheelbase that you would have on an RC10. But then in order to do that, I would have had to cut out this hole here with a Dremel or something, because otherwise it would get in the way of the servo mounting holes here. And I didn't want to cut it out, so I decided to just leave it. Also, these bars here work perfectly with the longer wheelbase setup, but that's because I'm using the RC10T front bulkhead. So if you use the front bulkhead, which mounts this bar further forward, then you have to use a long wheelbase sort of option here, screw hole option on the nose. If you use an RC10 front bulkhead, then these rods are actually mounting into these holes here. So this offset then requires you to use the shorter wheelbase hole options to push this whole thing back. But if you use an RC10 bulkhead, you can't use the RC10 shock tower, or the 10T shock tower, sorry. However, it does turn out that I think there are some companies out there, possibly RC Carbon Works, that do make like a 91 Worlds replica long front shock tower. So you can basically have all your original RC10 stuff and just throw on that taller front shock tower and put taller shocks on without doing this whole RC10T front conversion. In retrospect, that's probably an easier way to go, but I wanted to try to challenge myself here to see if I could do it this way. The only real problem that this particular setup creates is mounting the body, because the 10T front shock tower just has this little hole in here that you have to shove the body through. So the original body can't retain its full width. You actually have to cut it out at the nose so that you can slide the body through, and that's going to leave some of the front here exposed to dirt, as if you're running it, on a track or something. So this is where I am right now. The rear is basically done. I decided to just get this out of the way because it would be relatively quick. The front's going to take a little bit more time. I do have to do a little bit more dremeling to make the caster blocks fit correctly. In terms of width, it fits, or length, it fits fine. It's just that as far as full articulation, I need to drill out or sand out part of this surface here to allow that caster block to travel all the way this way. And I think likewise, coming out in the other direction, I have to sand out part of the bottom. That does remind me, on the rear, just another note here, when you do the rear suspension arm, if you just do the dremeling that I told you before, you will not get full droop in the arm, because the dog bone ends up running against this part here of the suspension arm. So what I did, this camera's not really focusing very well, I just took a larger diameter sanding bit and I grinded out part of this portion of the arm here to create like a bevel. So that way the arm can droop fully and the dog bone won't end up hitting the arm. Okay, so there are a few things you got to do. You got to do that. You have to drill larger holes, and you have to widen out the inside of the arms to make these Dynotic arms fit. But if you take the time to make sure you do it right, it works just fine. It's nice and smooth, no real problems or anything. And this is how you would fit modern RC10 rims that have a different offset in the wheel than the older RC10 rims, okay? So I think that's it for now. Eventually I'll have the whole steering assembly set up and, you know, wheels mounted and everything. And I would consider it done at that point because, at least for the time being, I'm not quite prepared to put a body on this. I would expect, however, that because you're using a longer wheelbase here, that a conventional RC10 body probably won't run up all the way to the nose anyway. So it might look a little funky once you mount the body on there, but it'll still be interesting. And I'll make a follow-up video when this is all complete. So thanks for watching.